The entire ballroom fell silent when the Duke's daughter walked past her mother. For one suspended heartbeat, no one breathed. No one moved. More than 200 guests stood beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers of Blackthorn House, watching a little girl in a pale blue silk dress step away from one of the most admired women in London society. Victoria Ravenshire, Duchess of Blackthorn, stood near the centre of the room with her arms slightly open, a graceful smile prepared for the embrace everyone expected. It never came. Instead, 8-year-old Lady Lillian Ravenshire crossed the polished marble floor, slipped between a cluster of startled guests, and threw herself into the arms of a young maid standing quietly beside the wall. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The orchestra faltered. A violin squeaked before the musicians recovered. The maid froze in shock. Her hands hovered uncertainly before gently settling around the child. Lillian buried her face against the woman's shoulder. "I want Genevieve," she whispered. The words were soft. The silence in the room made them impossible to miss. Nathaniel Ravenshire, Duke of Blackthorn, felt something cold settle in his chest. He stood at the far end of the ballroom beside a group of gentlemen discussing Parliament and railway investments. None of those matters seemed remotely important anymore. His gaze remained fixed on his daughter. Lillian did not look embarrassed. She did not appear confused. She clung to Genevieve Hartwell as though she had finally reached safety after a long and exhausting journey. The expression on Victoria's face changed so quickly that most guests missed it. Her smile remained. Years of social training prevented anything else. Yet for an instant, disappointment flashed through her eyes. Then irritation. Then something harder to identify. "Children can be unpredictable," Victoria said lightly. A few nervous laughs answered her. Nobody seemed convinced. Genevieve lowered her eyes. "My lady, perhaps Miss Lillian would prefer to greet her Grace first." Lillian tightened her grip. "No." Another wave of silence swept through the room. Nathaniel began crossing the ballroom. Guests instinctively moved aside for him. At 42 years old, the Duke of Blackthorn possessed the kind of authority that required no announcement. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in immaculate evening attire, he carried himself with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to command. His dark hair showed the first traces of silver at the temples. His grey eyes missed very little. Tonight, however, he realized there might be something important he had failed to see. He stopped beside his daughter. "Lillian." She looked up immediately. Fear flickered across her face. Not fear of him. Fear that someone might separate her from Genevieve. The realization unsettled him. "Would you like to tell me what is troubling you?" he asked gently. Lillian hesitated. Her small fingers tightened around the folds of Genevieve's sleeve. "Nothing is wrong, Papa." "Then why are you hiding behind Miss Hartwell?" Victoria asked. The question sounded pleasant enough. Yet something in the room shifted. Lillian lowered her gaze. Nathaniel noticed how quickly the child withdrew into herself. The lively spark that usually appeared around Genevieve vanished. "I am not hiding," she said quietly. Victoria's smile stiffened. "Of course not." Nathaniel studied both women. Then he studied Genevieve. The maid appeared deeply uncomfortable with the attention. She was 29 years old and had worked at Blackthorn House for nearly 7 years. During that time she had developed a reputation for competence, patience, and remarkable discretion. She was not someone who sought attention. In fact, she seemed determined to disappear from it. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged beneath a simple maid's cap. Her grey-blue eyes remained lowered. She stood perfectly still, as though hoping the floor might open and rescue her from the situation. "Perhaps," Nathaniel said calmly, "we should allow our guests to enjoy the evening." Relief spread through several faces around the room. Conversations cautiously resumed. The orchestra began playing again. Yet the atmosphere never fully recovered. Nathaniel knew why. London society thrived on observation. Every glance carried meaning. Every hesitation became gossip. Every unusual moment transformed into speculation. Tonight, his daughter had given society something irresistible. The daughter of a duke had chosen a maid over her own mother. The whispers would spread before midnight. Lillian remained beside Genevieve for the rest of the evening. Nathaniel noticed because he found himself watching. Every time Victoria approached, Lillian seemed to drift away. Every time Genevieve moved to another part of the ballroom, Lillian somehow followed. The pattern repeated itself so often that it became impossible to ignore. Near 10 o'clock, Nathaniel stepped onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. Cool evening air greeted him. The sounds of the party faded behind the closed doors. He rarely escaped his own events. Tonight he needed a moment to think. "Your Grace." Nathaniel turned. His longtime butler, Mr. Pembroke, stood respectfully near the doorway. "Is something wrong?" Nathaniel asked. "No, Your Grace." The older man hesitated. "I merely wondered whether you required anything." Nathaniel studied him. Mr. Pembroke had served the Ravenshire family for nearly 30 years. He knew when the man was withholding an opinion. "You have something to say." The butler looked uncomfortable. "It is not my place." "Then allow me to make it your place." A faint smile touched Pembroke's face. "Very well, Your Grace. I believe Lady Lillian is unusually attached to Miss Hartwell." Nathaniel almost laughed. That observation hardly requires special insight. "No, Your Grace." The butler's expression grew thoughtful. "But the reason may deserve attention." Nathaniel felt a strange sensation. "What reason?" Pembroke hesitated again. "I am not certain. Only that children often reveal truths adults overlook." Before Nathaniel could respond, movement in the garden caught his eye. He glanced down. Genevieve stood near a stone fountain beneath the moonlight. Lillian sat beside her on a marble bench. The child appeared relaxed in a way Nathaniel had not seen all evening. He found himself watching. Genevieve was saying something. Lillian laughed. The sound drifted faintly upward. Nathaniel frowned. When had he last heard his daughter laugh like that around Victoria? The answer should have come easily. It did not. The realization bothered him more than he expected. "Thank you, Pembroke," he said quietly. "You may return to the party." The butler bowed and disappeared. Nathaniel remained where he was. Below, Genevieve removed her gloves and handed them to Lillian. The child immediately slipped her tiny hands inside them and burst into another fit of laughter. Genevieve pretended to be shocked by the theft. Lillian giggled harder. The scene was simple. Harmless. Ordinary. Yet Nathaniel could not stop watching. For years he had assumed his household functioned exactly as it should. Victoria managed social obligations. He managed estates, business affairs, and political responsibilities. Their daughter received every advantage wealth could provide. Excellent tutors. Fine clothing. Beautiful surroundings. Security. Comfort. Opportunity. Had he mistaken those things for happiness? The thought lingered long after he returned to the ballroom. Shortly before midnight, the final guests departed. Blackthorn House gradually settled into silence. Servants extinguished candles. Footmen closed doors. Carriages vanished into the darkness beyond the estate gates. Nathaniel stood in his study reviewing correspondence he had no interest in reading. A knock sounded. "Enter." Victoria stepped inside. She had changed from her evening gown into a silk dressing robe. Even at this hour she appeared flawless. "You seem distracted," she observed. Nathaniel set down a letter. "Do I?" "You spent half the evening watching Lillian." "Did I?" Victoria walked toward the fireplace. "You are concerned about what happened." Nathaniel considered denying it. There seemed little point. "Were you not?" For the first time, something sharp entered her expression. Children occasionally form attachments to servants. This seems more than an attachment. Victoria stared into the fire. "You are making too much of it." Nathaniel studied his wife. They had been married for nearly 10 years. Their marriage was stable. Respectable. Successful by society standards. Yet suddenly he felt as though he were speaking to a stranger. When was the last time Lillian spent an entire afternoon with you? Victoria turned toward him. What an odd question. Answer it. A brief silence followed. I do not keep records of every afternoon. The response should have satisfied him. Instead, it deepened his unease. No, he said quietly. I suppose you do not. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Nathaniel, what exactly are you suggesting? He opened his mouth. Then stopped. He was not certain. That was the problem. For the first time in years, he realized there was something he did not understand about his own family. Something important. Something hidden beneath years of routine and assumptions. Victoria eventually retired. Nathaniel remained in his study long after midnight. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. The estate grew quiet. Yet his thoughts refused to settle. Shortly before 1 o'clock, he extinguished the lamp and left the room. As he passed through the upper corridor, he noticed a faint line of light beneath Lillian's bedroom door. Concern flickered through him. He opened the door carefully. The room was empty. His pulse quickened. Then he heard a sound from the adjoining nursery sitting room. He crossed the threshold. There, curled asleep on a small sofa beneath a blanket, was Lillian. Genevieve sat beside her in a chair with an open book resting in her lap. She had fallen asleep as well. The fire glowed softly in the hearth. For a long moment, Nathaniel simply stood there. Lillian's hand rested atop Genevieve's. Even in sleep, she had not let go. Something tightened in his chest. Slowly, Genevieve stirred awake. Her eyes widened when she saw him. She immediately rose. Your Grace. Nathaniel glanced at his daughter. Why is she here? Genevieve hesitated. Miss Lillian had a nightmare. A nightmare? Yes, Your Grace. Nathaniel looked at the sleeping child again. Did she ask for her mother? A strange expression crossed Genevieve's face. It vanished almost instantly. No, Your Grace. The answer echoed through the quiet room. Nathaniel felt an unexpected chill. She asked for you. Genevieve lowered her eyes. Yes, Your Grace. Nathaniel stared at his daughter sleeping peacefully beside the maid she trusted more than anyone else in the world. And for the first time, he began to wonder why. The following morning arrived beneath a sky the color of polished silver. A thin mist drifted across the rolling grounds of Blackthorn Estate, softening the distant tree line and turning the gardens into a watercolor landscape. From the windows of the breakfast room, the world appeared peaceful. Nathaniel Ravenshire found the contrast unsettling. His mind had remained occupied by the image he had discovered the previous night. His daughter asleep beside Genevieve. Her small hand wrapped around the maid's fingers as though letting go was unthinkable. The Duke lowered his newspaper and glanced across the breakfast table. Victoria sat opposite him, elegant as always. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows and illuminated the pearls at her throat. She looked entirely composed. Anyone observing them would have seen a successful aristocratic family enjoying a quiet morning. Nathaniel was beginning to suspect appearances concealed far more than they revealed. Will Lillian be joining us? He asked. Victoria lifted her teacup. She already ate. Nathaniel frowned slightly. At this hour? Apparently she was awake early. Nathaniel set down his coffee. Where is she now? The nursery, I imagine. Victoria's answer came without interest. The realization bothered him more than it should have. She did not know where her daughter was. Worse, she did not seem concerned about it. He rose from the table. You are leaving? Victoria asked. I should like to see my daughter before I spend the day buried beneath estate reports. A faint crease appeared between her brows. Nathaniel, you are behaving rather strangely. Am I? This sudden fascination with nursery routines is unusual. He offered a small smile. Perhaps I have neglected them too long. He left before she could respond. The corridors of Blackthorn House were already busy with servants beginning their daily responsibilities. Footmen carried trays. Housemaids moved quietly between rooms. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 9. Nathaniel climbed the staircase leading toward the nursery wing. As he approached, he heard laughter. Bright. Unrestrained. Childish. He stopped outside the partially open door. Lillian sat cross-legged on a rug near the window. A collection of toy animals surrounded her. Genevieve sat nearby, helping repair the loose ribbon on a stuffed rabbit. The scene should have been ordinary. Yet Nathaniel immediately noticed something. Lillian looked completely different than she had at last night's ball. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her smile came easily. Her eyes sparkled with energy. She looked secure. Safe. Happy. "Papa!" Lillian exclaimed when she noticed him. She immediately jumped to her feet and ran toward him. Nathaniel felt relief. At least she was not afraid of him. He knelt and opened his arms. She hugged him warmly. Yet even during the embrace, he noticed her glance back toward Genevieve. Almost as though confirming the maid was still there. The observation lodged itself firmly in his thoughts. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Papa." Genevieve stood respectfully. "Your Grace." Nathaniel nodded. "Miss Hartwell." Lillian tugged his sleeve. "Would you like to see my fox?" "Your fox?" "The one Genevieve repaired." Nathaniel allowed himself a smile. "I would be honored." For the next 15 minutes he remained in the nursery. Lillian enthusiastically introduced every toy, book, and drawing as though presenting priceless treasures. Genevieve quietly resumed her work. She spoke only when necessary. Yet Nathaniel noticed something else. Every time Lillian addressed him, she eventually looked toward Genevieve. Seeking approval. Seeking reassurance. Seeking connection. The behavior was impossible to ignore once he started paying attention. Eventually a tutor arrived for morning lessons. Nathaniel excused himself. As he reached the doorway, he heard Lillian whisper something. He paused. "Will you still be here when lessons are over?" The question was directed at Genevieve. The maid smiled gently. "Of course I will." Lillian visibly relaxed. Nathaniel continued down the corridor. His unease deepened. Throughout the morning he attempted to focus on estate business. Tenant reports required review. Correspondence from London demanded attention. Financial matters never paused simply because a father had questions about his family. Yet concentration proved difficult. Around noon he closed a ledger and stared out the study window. An uncomfortable memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, during a dinner attended by several neighboring families, Lillian had accidentally spilled juice on her dress. The child had become distressed. Nathaniel remembered expecting Victoria to comfort her. Instead, before the Duchess could react, Genevieve had appeared. Within moments Lillian had calmed down completely. At the time he had viewed it as efficient household management. Now he wondered whether something deeper had been hiding in plain sight. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Mr. Pembroke stepped inside. "Your Grace, Lord Ashcroft has arrived." Nathaniel sighed. "Show him in." A few minutes later, his oldest friend entered the study. Sebastian Ashcroft, Earl of Hartwell, possessed the rare ability to ignore rank whenever he found it inconvenient. He immediately dropped into a chair without invitation. "You look dreadful," Sebastian announced. "Good afternoon to you as well." "Something is bothering you." Nathaniel leaned back. "Am I that transparent?" "To everyone else, no. To me, unfortunately, yes." Nathaniel considered remaining silent. Then he found himself speaking. "Have you ever realized you know less about your family than you assumed?" Sebastian's amusement faded. "That sounds serious." Nathaniel recounted the events of the previous evening. The birthday celebration. Lillian's behavior. The growing sense that he had missed something important. When he finished, Sebastian remained thoughtful. "How old is the maid?" 29. "And how long has she worked here?" "Nearly 7 years." Sebastian nodded slowly. "Then she has been present for most of your daughter's life." Nathaniel frowned. What are you suggesting? Only that affection does not appear from nowhere. Nathaniel disliked how reasonable that sounded. Victoria insists children become attached to servants. Children become attached to people who make them feel safe. The answer came too quickly. Too confidently. Nathaniel stared at his friend. You sound as though you have personal experience. Sebastian laughed softly. My mother delegated most childcare responsibilities to a governess. By age 10 I trusted the governess far more than I trusted my parents. Nathaniel fell silent. The possibility unsettled him. After Sebastian departed, the Duke found himself paying closer attention than ever before. Over the next several days he deliberately observed interactions throughout the household. What he discovered raised even more questions. Every afternoon, Lillian searched for Genevieve. Every evening, she sought Genevieve before bed. Every small triumph, disappointment, fear, or excitement eventually found its way to Genevieve. The pattern remained remarkably consistent. Victoria noticed none of it. Or perhaps she chose not to notice. On Thursday afternoon, Nathaniel encountered a particularly revealing moment. A summer storm rolled across the countryside. Thunder echoed beyond the windows. Rain streaked the glass in silver sheets. Nathaniel happened to be crossing the upper corridor when he heard hurried footsteps. Lillian raced around a corner. Her face looked pale. She nearly collided with him. Lillian? The child froze. Papa. What is wrong? Another rumble of thunder rolled through the estate. Lillian instinctively stepped backward. Nathaniel extended a hand. You needn't be frightened. She nodded. Yet instead of moving toward him, she looked down the hallway. Searching. Waiting. Moments later Genevieve appeared carrying folded linens. Relief instantly transformed Lillian's expression. The child rushed toward her. There you are. Genevieve immediately set aside the linens. Was the thunder loud? Lillian nodded. A little. Come. Genevieve offered her hand. Let us count between the lightning and thunder. That always helps. Nathaniel watched silently. Within seconds Lillian relaxed. The fear vanished. The transformation was remarkable. As they walked away, he experienced a troubling realization. His daughter had not run to her father. She had not sought her mother. She had searched for Genevieve. Later that evening he stood outside the drawing room where Victoria entertained several guests. Laughter drifted through the open doorway. The Duchess excelled in social settings. She always had. Conversation flowed effortlessly around her. Compliments. Observations. Carefully managed charm. Nathaniel studied the scene. Then he thought about the nursery. About thunderstorms. About bedtime stories. About nightmares. About a little girl who seemed unable to feel secure unless one particular person was nearby. Something did not fit. Something was missing. That night he found Lillian reading beside the fire in the family sitting room. Genevieve sat nearby sewing a torn cuff. Nathaniel took a seat opposite them. For several minutes nobody spoke. Then he addressed his daughter. Lillian. She looked up immediately. Yes, Papa. If you were frightened or sad, who would you speak to first? The question appeared harmless. Yet Genevieve suddenly became very still. Lillian considered the answer. Nathaniel expected hesitation. Instead the response arrived instantly. Genevieve. The room fell silent. Lillian seemed unaware of the significance. Nathaniel forced a smile. Not your mother. Confusion crossed the child's face. Genuine confusion. As though the possibility had never occurred to her. Mama is very busy. The words struck him harder than they should have. Children often reveal truths adults spend years avoiding. Mr. Pembroke had said something remarkably similar. Nathaniel glanced toward Genevieve. The maid looked uncomfortable. Almost worried. Your Grace, she began carefully, Lady Lillian adores her Grace. Lillian lowered her eyes. Nathaniel noticed. The reaction lasted only a second. It was enough. Something inside him tightened. He smiled gently at his daughter and changed the subject. Yet long after she went upstairs, her answer continued echoing in his mind. If you were frightened or sad, who would you speak to first? Genevieve. Not because she was a maid. Not because she was convenient. Not because she happened to be nearby. The answer had come too quickly. Too naturally. Too honestly. And for the first time, Nathaniel began to suspect that whatever separated his daughter from her mother had not happened recently. It had been growing quietly for years. He simply had not noticed. 3 days later, Nathaniel Ravenshire discovered something that made his growing unease impossible to dismiss. The morning had begun like countless others. Estate correspondence occupied his desk. Tenant reports required attention. A shipment of wool from Yorkshire demanded review. Yet despite the mountain of responsibilities before him, his concentration remained elusive. Again and again his thoughts returned to the same troubling question. Why did Lillian trust Genevieve more than her own mother? The answer seemed close enough to touch and yet frustratingly out of reach. Shortly after noon, Nathaniel left his study and crossed toward the family wing. He intended to spend a few minutes with his daughter before traveling to a neighboring estate for a business dinner. As he approached the schoolroom, he heard voices inside. The tutor was conducting a lesson on geography. Nathaniel paused outside the partially open door. Can anyone tell me the capital of France? The tutor asked. Several children from neighboring noble families answered eagerly. Lillian sat near the window. Her attention appeared elsewhere. Nathaniel followed her gaze. She was drawing something in the margin of her notebook. Not listening. Not daydreaming exactly. Concentrating. The lesson ended a few minutes later. Children gathered their belongings and hurried from the room. Nathaniel stepped aside before Lillian could notice him. He waited until the room emptied. Then he entered. The tutor bowed respectfully and departed. The schoolroom fell silent. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the south gardens. Dust motes drifted lazily through the air. Nathaniel's gaze settled on Lillian's desk. A notebook remained behind. He frowned. His daughter rarely forgot her things. He crossed the room intending to return it later. As he picked it up, a folded sheet of paper slipped free and drifted onto the floor. Nathaniel bent to retrieve it. Then he froze. It was a drawing. Children's drawings often lacked proportion or technical skill. This one was no exception. Yet the meaning behind it was painfully clear. A figure stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One was obviously Lillian. Another represented Genevieve. Nathaniel recognized her immediately because the figure wore a maid's uniform. The two stood side by side holding hands. A third figure represented himself. He stood nearby. Slightly removed but included. The fourth figure had been crossed out. Not scribbled accidentally. Not damaged by age or carelessness. Deliberately crossed out with heavy pencil marks. Nathaniel stared at the page. The crossed-out figure wore a dress. There could be little doubt who it represented. His stomach tightened. Slowly, he lowered himself into a chair. For several moments he simply looked at the drawing. Then he turned it over. More sketches filled the reverse side. Again Genevieve appeared. Again Lillian stood beside her. Again Victoria was absent. Not crossed out this time. Simply missing. Nathaniel felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Children expressed truths through drawings that they could not always explain with words. He remembered something Sebastian had said. Affection does not appear from nowhere. Neither does rejection. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Nathaniel quickly folded the drawing. Enter. The door opened. To his surprise, Genevieve stepped inside carrying a stack of books. She immediately stopped when she saw him seated at the desk. Your Grace. Nathaniel rose. The drawing remained hidden in his hand. Miss Hartwell. She placed the books on a shelf. For a moment neither spoke. Then Nathaniel made a decision. "May I ask you something?" Genevieve looked cautious. "Of course, Your Grace." He studied her face carefully. 7 years. She had served his household for 7 years. Yet he suddenly realized how little he truly knew about her. "Why is my daughter so attached to you?" Genevieve blinked. The question clearly caught her off guard. "I am not certain I understand." "I think you do." Her expression softened slightly. "Lady Lillian is a wonderful child." "That was not my question." Silence stretched between them. Genevieve lowered her eyes. Nathaniel noticed she always did that whenever conversations approached uncomfortable territory. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "children often form strong bonds with people who spend time with them." Nathaniel considered her answer. It was reasonable, sensible, and entirely insufficient. Many servants spend time with children. "Yes. Yet my daughter searches for you whenever she is frightened." Genevieve remained silent. "She seeks your approval, your comfort, your reassurance." The maid clasped her hands together. "I care deeply for Lady Lillian." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Nathaniel heard it immediately. "I know you do." For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across her features. Concern. Worry. Perhaps even guilt. "She is a remarkable child," Genevieve said quietly. "She deserves every happiness." Nathaniel watched her closely. Something felt important about that statement. He simply could not determine why. Before he could press further, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Lillian appeared in the doorway. Relief flooded her face the moment she saw Genevieve. "There you are." Nathaniel felt another stab of unease. The child had not even noticed him at first. Genevieve smiled. "Were you looking for me?" "I finished my lessons." Lillian nodded enthusiastically. Then she finally saw her father. "Papa." Nathaniel forced a smile. "Am I invisible today?" Lillian laughed. The sound was warm and genuine. Yet even as she crossed the room to hug him, her attention remained partly fixed on Genevieve. The pattern repeated itself so consistently that it was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, another opportunity presented itself. Blackthorn House hosted a small dinner attended by several neighboring families. Nothing extravagant. Merely one of the endless social obligations expected of aristocratic life. Nathaniel usually endured such events without much thought. Tonight he found himself observing rather than participating. The dining room glowed beneath candlelight. Silver gleamed. Crystal reflected warm golden light. Conversation flowed easily around the long table. Victoria occupied her usual position with effortless grace. She charmed guests, directed discussions, maintained the polished image expected of a duchess. Nobody would have guessed anything was wrong. Yet Nathaniel found himself studying the interactions between mother and daughter. Or rather the lack of them. Victoria addressed Lillian only twice during the meal. Both occasions concerned manners. "Sit straighter." "Use the proper fork." Nothing cruel. Nothing unusual. Yet nothing affectionate either. Meanwhile, every time Genevieve quietly entered the room to assist the servants, Lillian's face brightened. The difference was subtle. But once noticed, impossible to ignore. After dinner, guests gathered in the drawing room. Music filled the air. Tea was served. Conversations drifted between politics, literature, and the latest London gossip. Nathaniel stood near the fireplace when Lady Ashcroft approached him. Sebastian's wife possessed a reputation for noticing everything. "You seem preoccupied, Your Grace." Nathaniel smiled politely. "Do I?" "Very much so." Her gaze shifted across the room. "This concerns Lady Lillian, I assume." Nathaniel felt a brief jolt of surprise. "What makes you think that?" Lady Ashcroft appeared almost amused. "Because half the county has been discussing her birthday celebration." Nathaniel resisted a sigh. Of course they had. Society never wasted a good mystery. People enjoy gossip. People enjoy puzzles even more. Her voice softened. Forgive my frankness, but children rarely choose one person so strongly without reason. Another variation of the same observation. Nathaniel was beginning to hear it everywhere. Children reveal truths adults overlook. Affection does not appear from nowhere. Children do not choose without reason. The words followed him long after the guests departed. Near midnight, unable to sleep, Nathaniel wandered through the quiet corridors of Blackthorn House. Moonlight spilled through tall windows. The estate rested in peaceful silence. As he passed the family sitting room, he noticed a small object lying beneath a chair. Curious, he bent down and retrieved it. Another drawing. This one appeared older. The paper showed signs of wear. Folded many times. Carefully preserved. Nathaniel moved closer to the window. Moonlight illuminated the image. Again he saw Lillian. Again he saw Genevieve. This time the drawing included words written in childish handwriting. The letters were uneven and imperfect, yet perfectly readable. My safe place. Nathaniel stared at the words. His pulse quickened. Not because of the drawing itself. Because of what it implied. Safe. Children used many descriptions. Kind. Funny. Nice. Pretty. Safe carried different meaning. Safe suggested protection. Comfort. Security. The absence of fear. Slowly, Nathaniel folded the paper. Something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not scandalously wrong. Yet wrong nonetheless. He could feel it now. Beneath years of routine. Beneath polished appearances. Beneath the perfect image society saw whenever it looked at the Ravenshire family. A hidden story waited. And for reasons he could not explain, he was beginning to fear that his daughter had been carrying that story alone for far too long. As he slipped the drawing into his pocket, another thought surfaced. If Genevieve was truly Lillian's safe place, then what exactly had made a little girl need one in the first place? The question haunted Nathaniel for the next week. What had made his daughter need a safe place? The answer lingered somewhere beyond his reach, concealed behind years of ordinary routines and assumptions he had never thought to question. Life at Blackthorn House continued as it always had. Servants carried trays through polished corridors. Tutors conducted lessons. Guests arrived and departed. Victoria managed social obligations with her usual flawless precision. Yet beneath the smooth surface of daily life, Nathaniel found himself watching everything. Listening more carefully. Noticing details that once would have escaped him entirely. The breakthrough arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Dark clouds rolled across the countryside. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of the estate. Nathaniel had spent most of the day reviewing tenant concerns with his steward. The meeting ended earlier than expected. Rather than return immediately to his study, he wandered toward the library. As he passed the old morning room near the east wing, he heard voices inside. The door stood slightly ajar. He recognized one voice instantly. It belonged to Mrs. Abbott, the elderly nursery governess who had retired 3 years earlier but occasionally visited Blackthorn House. The second voice belonged to Mr. Pembroke. Nathaniel paused. He had no intention of eavesdropping. Then a familiar name caught his attention. Lady Lillian was always different after that day, Mrs. Abbott said quietly. Nathaniel stopped moving. Silence followed. Then Pembroke answered. I often wondered whether anyone else noticed. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. After that day. What day? He stepped closer. Neither speaker appeared aware of his presence. Rain masked any sound he might have made. Miss Hartwell was remarkable, Mrs. Abbott continued. Most young women would have panicked. Pembroke gave a thoughtful hum. Instead she kept her head. Thank goodness she did. Nathaniel felt every muscle in his body tighten. Suddenly he pushed the door open. Both servants jumped in surprise. Your Grace. Nathaniel entered slowly. I apologize for interrupting. Neither looked convinced by the apology. Mrs. Abbott immediately appeared nervous. Pembroke became unusually interested in the fireplace. Nathaniel glanced between them. "You were discussing my daughter." Silence. "You were discussing something that happened years ago." More silence. Nathaniel folded his arms. "I believe I have the right to know what it was." Mrs. Abbott exchanged a glance with Pembroke. The older governess looked deeply uncomfortable. "Your Grace, it was nothing serious." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "That answer convinces me of the opposite." Another glance passed between them. Finally Pembroke sighed. "Perhaps it is time." Nathaniel waited. Mrs. Abbott lowered herself into a chair. Her expression softened with memory. Lady Lillian was barely a year old. The room seemed to grow quieter. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Her Grace attended a charity function in London that afternoon, Mrs. Abbott said. "You were in Manchester regarding estate business." Nathaniel vaguely remembered the trip. Barely. At the time, Lillian had been a baby. There had been no reason to believe anything significant occurred during his absence. "Continue." Mrs. Abbott nodded. "Lady Lillian developed a sudden fever." Nathaniel frowned. Childhood illnesses were common. The doctor had not arrived yet. "We attempted to keep her comfortable." The older woman's eyes grew distant. She became frightened. Very frightened. Something about the way she said it unsettled him. "Where was Victoria?" Mrs. Abbott hesitated. Her Grace had already departed for London. Nathaniel felt a slight discomfort. Could she not have returned? Another silence followed. "The event was important," Pembroke said carefully. Nathaniel looked at him. The butler rarely chose words so cautiously. "And?" Mrs. Abbott clasped her hands together. "Miss Hartwell remained with Lady Lillian the entire night." Nathaniel blinked. "The entire night?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Without rest?" "Without rest." The answer came immediately. Mrs. Abbott smiled faintly. The poor girl never left the nursery except to fetch water. Nathaniel pictured Genevieve 7 years younger. Alone with a frightened infant. Watching over her through the darkness. The image touched something unexpectedly deep inside him. Surely that cannot explain. He stopped. Because something in Mrs. Abbott's expression suggested there was more. Much more. "What are you not telling me?" he asked quietly. The governess looked toward the window. Lady Lillian would not stop crying. Nathaniel listened carefully. Hours passed. Nothing helped. A gentle smile appeared. Then Miss Hartwell picked her up. The older woman's voice softened. The child became quiet almost immediately. Nathaniel felt an odd sensation. Just like that. Just like that. Pembroke nodded. "I remember it myself." Mrs. Abbott continued. "Every time someone else held her, she cried. Every time Miss Hartwell took her back, she calmed down." Nathaniel absorbed the information slowly. Children form attachments. "Not like that," Mrs. Abbott said. The answer arrived with surprising certainty. It was different. Nathaniel thought of the drawings. The nightmares. The thunderstorm. The constant searching. Different. The word echoed in his mind. "What happened afterward?" he asked. Mrs. Abbott smiled sadly. "Nothing dramatic. The fever passed. Lady Lillian recovered." She paused. But from that day forward, she looked for Miss Hartwell whenever she was upset. Nathaniel sat down across from her. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years ago he had returned from a business trip and discovered Genevieve carrying a sleeping toddler through the gardens. He had barely noticed at the time. Now he wondered how many moments like that he had overlooked. Hundreds perhaps. Thousands. "Why did no one tell me?" he asked. Mrs. Abbott looked genuinely surprised. "Tell you what, Your Grace." Nathaniel opened his mouth. Then closed it. He suddenly realized how difficult the answer was. Tell him that a servant had become his daughter's source of comfort. Tell him that a bond had quietly formed beneath his own roof. Tell him that the child he loved trusted someone else first whenever fear entered her world. No. Nobody would have thought such information important. Not then. Yet it felt important now. Very important. After leaving the morning room, Nathaniel spent the rest of the afternoon deep in thought. The rain eventually stopped. Pale sunlight emerged from behind the clouds. By evening the estate grounds glistened beneath a fresh wash of gold. He found himself drawn toward the nursery wing once more. Lillian sat near the fireplace reading aloud from a storybook. Genevieve listened while mending a torn ribbon. The scene looked peaceful. Familiar. Yet Nathaniel now viewed it through different eyes. He no longer saw a maid performing her duties. He saw someone who had been there during countless moments he himself had missed. First fevers. Nightmares. Tears. Fears. Small triumphs. Childhood disappointments. The invisible experiences that shaped a life. Lillian noticed him first. Her face brightened. "Papa." Nathaniel smiled. "May I join you?" "Of course." He sat beside her. The child immediately leaned against his arm. The gesture warned him. Yet a few moments later she glanced toward Genevieve. Instinctively. Automatically. Nathaniel noticed. He always noticed now. "What are you reading?" he asked. Lillian proudly displayed the book. "Genevieve says this is her favorite." Genevieve looked embarrassed. "I merely mentioned enjoying it when I was younger." Nathaniel studied her. "You seem to have shared many things with my daughter." A brief silence followed. Genevieve's expression became unreadable. "I suppose I have." Lillian smiled. "She knows all the best stories." Nathaniel looked at the child. Then at the maid. Then back again. Suddenly he found himself asking a question he had not planned to voice. "Lillian." "Yes?" "What do you remember about being very little?" The child considered. "Not much." Nathaniel nodded. That was expected. Then she surprised him. "I remember Genevieve singing." The answer emerged instantly. "You remember that?" "A little." She smiled softly. It always made everything feel better. Nathaniel felt a strange tightening in his chest. Children rarely remembered specific moments from infancy. Yet some emotions remained. Some feelings settled so deeply into the heart that they endured long after memories faded. Safety. Comfort. Trust. Love. Perhaps that was what he was seeing. Not the memory of events themselves. The memory of how those events had felt. As dusk settled beyond the windows, Nathaniel remained with them longer than usual. He listened to Lillian read. He watched Genevieve encourage her. He observed the effortless affection between them. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dramatic. Simply a connection built across years. Yet as the evening drew to a close, another thought began troubling him. The fever story explained why the bond had started. It did not explain why it had become so strong. Nor did it explain why Lillian seemed increasingly distant from Victoria. One question had been answered. Another had quietly taken its place. And somehow, Nathaniel suspected the second question would prove far more difficult than the first. The answer arrived hidden inside a forgotten drawer. Nathaniel discovered it entirely by accident. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since his conversation with Mrs. Abbott. The revelation about Lillian's childhood fever had explained the beginning of her attachment to Genevieve. It did not explain the distance between mother and daughter. If anything, that mystery seemed to deepen with every passing day. Autumn gradually settled across the countryside. The mornings arrived cooler. Leaves along the estate grounds shifted from green to gold. Blackthorn House prepared for the busy social season ahead. Invitations arrived daily. Charitable events demanded Victoria's attention. Business matters pulled Nathaniel in multiple directions. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary life, he continued watching. Observing. searching for answers. One afternoon he found himself in the old family sitting room on the second floor. The room had once belonged to his grandmother. Few people used it now. Shelves lined the walls. Cabinets held decades of accumulated belongings. Nathaniel had come looking for estate records from years earlier. Instead he found something entirely different. A small wooden box sat forgotten inside a cabinet drawer. Dust coated the lid. Curious, he opened it. The contents immediately revealed themselves as childhood keepsakes. Dried flowers. Ribbons. Small sketches. Notes written in uneven handwriting. Nathaniel recognized the handwriting at once. Lillian. He smiled despite himself. Like many parents, he occasionally discovered collections of treasures that only children considered valuable. He intended to place the box back inside the drawer. Then something caught his attention. A folded page rested near the bottom. Unlike the others, it appeared carefully preserved. Nathaniel unfolded it. The paper contained several lines written in a child's hand. The letters wavered slightly. Some words were misspelled. The sentiment behind them remained unmistakably clear. Dear Genevieve, thank you for staying with me when I was scared. Thank you for reading stories when it was dark. Thank you for making everything feel safe. I love you. Love, Lillian. Nathaniel stared at the page. The letter could not have been recent. The handwriting belonged to a much younger child. 7 years old perhaps. Maybe 6. Yet what unsettled him was not the affection. It was the phrasing. Thank you for staying with me when I was scared. The words echoed in his thoughts. Slowly, he continued searching through the box. More folded pages appeared. Some contained drawings. Others held notes. Most were addressed to Genevieve. Several included small observations about daily life. One made Nathaniel pause completely. Today Mama said she was busy again. Genevieve helped me with my reading. I wish Mama liked reading too. Nathaniel read the sentence twice. Then 3 times. His expression slowly hardened. Another note appeared beneath it. Mama had to leave before breakfast. Genevieve braided my hair. Everyone said it looked pretty. I wish Mama could have seen it. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Nathaniel lowered himself into a chair. One note after another revealed a pattern he could no longer ignore. None accused Victoria of cruelty. None described dramatic mistreatment. The pain existed precisely because it was smaller than that. Repeated absences. Missed moments. Forgotten promises. Tiny disappointments that accumulated year after year until they formed something much larger. Nathaniel continued reading. Today I got a prize for handwriting. Genevieve came to see it. Papa was in London. Mama had visitors. I think she would have been proud. His chest tightened. Another page. I wanted to show Mama my painting, but she was getting ready for dinner. Genevieve put it on the wall so everyone could see it. Then another. Mama said we would have tea together. She forgot because guests arrived. Genevieve had tea with me instead. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Not because Victoria intended harm, but because intention mattered less than impact. Children measured love differently than adults. They measured presence, attention, reliability. Someone who arrived when promised. Someone who listened. Someone who stayed. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The door opened. Genevieve stepped inside carrying a basket of linens. She immediately froze when she saw him seated beside the open box. For a brief moment, genuine alarm crossed her face. Nathaniel noticed. Miss Hartwell. Your Grace. Her voice sounded careful. Nathaniel held up one of the letters. Did you know these existed? Genevieve remained silent. Then she nodded. Some of them. Why did you keep them? A faint smile touched her face. Because Lady Lillian gave them to me. Nathaniel looked down at the page in his hands. You never threw them away. No, Your Grace. The answer came softly. He studied her. Why? Genevieve hesitated. Then she spoke with unusual honesty. Because they mattered to her. Nathaniel looked back at the letters. Every note reflected the same longing. Not for toys. Not for wealth. Not for privileges. For attention. For connection. For time. The realization disturbed him more than he wished to admit. Did Victoria know? He asked. Genevieve immediately lowered her eyes. Your Grace. Did she? A long pause followed. I do not believe so. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. He was not surprised. The truth was becoming increasingly obvious. Victoria had not seen these moments because she had not been present for them. Genevieve shifted uncomfortably. Her Grace loves Lady Lillian. Nathaniel looked at her. The maid's loyalty remained remarkable. Even now she defended Victoria. I am sure she does. She truly does. Nathaniel nodded. Then why does my daughter write letters wishing her mother had attended simple moments in her life? Genevieve had no answer. Or perhaps she had one she could not say aloud. The silence between them stretched. Finally Nathaniel folded the letters and placed them carefully back into the box. Thank you, Miss Hartwell. She looked surprised. For what? For keeping these. Emotion flickered briefly across her face. Then vanished. You are welcome, Your Grace. After she left, Nathaniel remained alone with his thoughts. The letters revealed something important. Yet they also introduced a new concern. Throughout every note, one pattern repeated itself relentlessly. Whenever Victoria was absent, Genevieve appeared. Whenever disappointment occurred, Genevieve softened it. Whenever loneliness surfaced, Genevieve filled the empty space. The maid had not replaced her mother. She had become the person left standing whenever a mother failed to arrive. That distinction mattered. Deeply. That evening, Nathaniel found himself paying closer attention than ever before. During dinner, Victoria discussed an upcoming charity gala in London. Her schedule sounded exhausting. Committees. Meetings. Preparations. Social obligations. Everything she described was entirely respectable. Entirely appropriate for a duchess. Yet Nathaniel could not stop thinking about the letters hidden upstairs. At one point Victoria smiled across the table. You have hardly spoken all evening. Nathaniel set down his glass. I have been thinking. About what? For a moment he considered telling her everything. The letters. The questions. The growing realization. Instead he simply said, about Lillian. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Is something wrong? Nathaniel almost laughed at the irony. If only the answer were that simple. I am not certain. Later that night, after everyone retired, Nathaniel walked past the nursery sitting room. Light glowed beneath the door. Curious, he paused. Lillian sat curled beside the fire. Genevieve occupied the chair next to her. The child appeared upset about something. Nathaniel could not hear every word. He caught enough. I know she loves me, Lillian said quietly. Of course she does, Genevieve answered. Then why is she always busy? The question hung in the air. Nathaniel felt his heart sink. Genevieve did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried gentle sadness. Sometimes people love differently than we wish they would. Silence followed. Then Lillian nodded slowly. Nathaniel stepped away from the door before either could discover him there. He returned to his study and sat alone for a very long time. The mystery was changing shape. At first he had believed the story centered on Genevieve. Now he was beginning to understand that Genevieve might simply be the result of something else. Something older. Something deeper. A child had reached for the person who consistently remained by her side. Year after year. Moment after moment. Letter after letter. And for the first time, Nathaniel wondered whether his daughter had stopped expecting her mother to be there long ago. The first snowfall arrived 3 weeks later. It was not enough to cover the estate grounds completely. Thin white streaks dusted the gardens and settled across the stone walls surrounding Blackthorn House. The air carried a sharper chill. Fires burned longer. Windows remained closed against the cold. Inside the estate, preparations for Christmas slowly began. Evergreen garlands appeared along staircases. Servants polished silver for upcoming holiday gatherings. Life moved forward as it always did. Yet Nathaniel could not shake the growing weight of everything he had learned. The letters remained locked inside his desk. He found himself reading them more often than he should have. Every page revealed the same quiet truth. His daughter had spent years reaching for her mother and finding someone else waiting in her place. He had not yet confronted Victoria. Partly because he lacked certainty. Partly because he feared what certainty might reveal. The turning point arrived unexpectedly on a bitterly cold Tuesday evening. Nathaniel had returned from London after 3 days away attending meetings related to parliamentary land proposals. The journey home had been exhausting. Snow mixed with rain throughout much of the trip. By the time his carriage rolled through the estate gates, darkness had already fallen. He expected the usual routine. Dinner. Correspondence. Sleep. Instead, he stepped into a household gripped by quiet concern. Mr. Pembroke met him in the entrance hall. The butler's expression immediately alerted him. "Your Grace." Nathaniel removed his gloves. "What has happened?" "Lady Lillian has taken ill." The Duke froze. "Ill?" "A fever, Your Grace." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. "How severe?" "The physician has already visited." Nathaniel did not wait for further explanation. He crossed the hall and headed directly toward the nursery wing. The familiar corridor felt strangely long. Servants moved quietly. Voices remained hushed. The atmosphere reminded him of something he could not quite place. When he reached Lillian's room, he pushed open the door without knocking. Firelight glowed softly inside. A lamp burned near the bed. The physician packed instruments into a leather case. Mrs. Abbott sat nearby. Genevieve occupied a chair beside the bed. Her attention never left the child. Lillian slept fitfully beneath heavy blankets. Nathaniel immediately crossed the room. "What did the doctor say?" The physician straightened. "Nothing alarming, Your Grace. A seasonal fever. She should recover fully with rest." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Relief washed through him. "Thank God." The physician offered a reassuring nod. "The fever is uncomfortable but not dangerous." Nathaniel looked toward his daughter. Her cheeks appeared flushed. Strands of golden hair clung to her forehead. She looked smaller somehow. More vulnerable. "How long has she been ill?" "Since early this morning," Mrs. Abbott answered. Nathaniel frowned. "And Victoria?" Silence followed. The hesitation lasted only a second. It was enough. "Her Grace attended the Winter Charity Committee gathering in London," Mrs. Abbott said carefully. Nathaniel stared at her. "She left?" The meeting had been scheduled for months. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. A bitter sense of familiarity settled over him. 7 years ago. A fever. Victoria away. Genevieve remaining behind. The pattern repeated itself with unsettling precision. "Did Victoria know Lillian was ill?" he asked. "Yes, Your Grace." Nathaniel said nothing. He simply moved toward the bed and sat beside his daughter. The physician eventually departed. Mrs. Abbott excused herself. One by one the others quietly left the room. Soon only Nathaniel and Genevieve remained. Snow drifted past the windows outside. Firelight flickered softly against the walls. Lillian stirred beneath the blankets. "Genevieve," she murmured. Nathaniel felt something tighten inside him. The child had not even opened her eyes. Yet she knew exactly who sat nearby. Genevieve immediately leaned forward. "I am here." Lillian relaxed almost instantly. Her breathing steadied. Within moments she drifted back to sleep. Nathaniel watched the entire exchange. Neither participant seemed aware of how revealing it was. Has she asked for her mother? He asked quietly. Genevieve hesitated. Then answered honestly. No, Your Grace. Nathaniel looked down at his hands. The answer hurt more than he expected. Not because it reflected poorly on Victoria. Because it reflected the emotional reality of an 8-year-old child. When frightened. When vulnerable. When uncomfortable. She sought comfort elsewhere. The hours passed slowly. Midnight arrived. Then 1 o'clock. The estate settled into complete silence. Nathaniel expected Genevieve to retire. She did not. Every time Lillian stirred, Genevieve responded immediately. A cool cloth for her forehead. Water when she awoke thirsty. Reassurance whenever anxiety surfaced. The care appeared effortless. Not because the task was easy. Because she had performed it countless times before. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Nathaniel finally spoke. How many times have you done this? Genevieve looked up. Your Grace? Sat beside her through the night. A shadow crossed her face. I am not certain. Nathaniel studied her. More than once. Yes. More than 10 times. A faint smile touched her lips. Children become ill occasionally. Nathaniel understood the answer for what it was. An attempt to avoid embarrassing anyone. Especially Victoria. You care for her very much. Genevieve's gaze shifted toward the sleeping child. Warmth softened her features. Yes. The single word carried remarkable emotion. Nathaniel noticed. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. Genevieve looked surprised. Why? Nathaniel nodded. You could have viewed this as employment. Duty. Obligation. Genevieve remained silent for several moments. Fire crackled softly nearby. Snow continued falling outside. Finally she answered. Because she never treated me like a servant. Nathaniel frowned. What do you mean? A sad smile appeared. When Lady Lillian was very young, she used to ask why I never sat at the table with everyone else. Nathaniel could almost hear the child's voice. Innocent. Curious. Honest. What did you tell her? The truth. That servants had different responsibilities. Genevieve looked down. She cried. Nathaniel blinked. She cried. For nearly an hour. The maid laughed softly at the memory. She declared it terribly unfair. Nathaniel found himself smiling despite the circumstances. It sounded exactly like his daughter. Eventually she decided I was family anyway. The room fell quiet again. Nathaniel considered those words carefully. Family. Not servant. Not employee. Family. A knot formed in his chest. Because suddenly he understood something important. Lillian had never viewed Genevieve as a replacement. Children did not think in such categories. She simply loved the person who consistently showed up. The person who listened. Stayed. Cared. The person who made promises and kept them. Around 3 o'clock, Lillian woke again. Her eyes remained half-closed with exhaustion. Papa. Nathaniel immediately leaned forward. I am here. A faint smile appeared. You came home. Of course I did. She looked relieved. Then her gaze shifted toward Genevieve. Relief deepened. The sight struck him unexpectedly hard. She needed both of them. Yet one presence seemed expected. The other seemed essential. Will you stay? She whispered. Nathaniel opened his mouth to answer. Genevieve spoke first. We are not going anywhere. Lillian nodded sleepily. Then closed her eyes again. Nathaniel looked at Genevieve. The maid's attention remained fixed entirely on the child. No performance. No attempt to gain favor. No hidden agenda. Only genuine concern. For the first time, another realization surfaced. One he had carefully avoided until now. The admiration he felt for Genevieve was becoming something more complicated. More dangerous. He respected her. Trusted her. Appreciated her devotion. Yet lately he found himself noticing details he once ignored. The calm strength beneath her quiet demeanor. The patience she showed everyone around her. The kindness that never demanded recognition. Nathaniel immediately pushed the thought away. It was inappropriate. Unhelpful. The issue before him concerned his daughter. Nothing else. Yet the feeling lingered. Subtle but undeniable. Dawn finally arrived. Pale winter light spilled through the curtains. The fever had already begun to ease. Lillian slept peacefully. Nathaniel rose from his chair and stretched stiff muscles. Genevieve looked equally exhausted. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head. "I am fine. You have been awake all night." "So have you." Nathaniel almost smiled. Before either could say more, footsteps approached from the corridor. The door opened. Victoria entered. Elegant as always despite the early hour. She paused upon seeing the scene. Nathaniel beside the bed. Genevieve still keeping watch. Lillian sleeping peacefully between them. Something unreadable crossed the Duchess's face. Then disappeared. "How is she?" Victoria asked. Nathaniel looked at his wife. Then at the exhausted maid who had spent the entire night protecting a frightened child once again. A strange certainty settled inside him. The answers he had been searching for were close now. Very close. And for the first time, he suspected Victoria already knew exactly what those answers would be. The moment happened 3 days after Lillian's fever broke. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Yet it changed everything. Winter sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the nursery sitting room. Snow covered the gardens beyond, transforming Blackthorn Estate into a landscape of white and silver. The household had finally relaxed. Lillian's recovery progressed quickly. Her appetite returned. Her laughter returned. The anxious atmosphere that had settled over the estate began to fade. Nathaniel should have felt relieved. Instead, his questions only seemed to multiply. He had spent the previous days observing carefully. Victoria visited the nursery more frequently than usual. She asked after Lillian's health. She brought gifts from London. She attempted conversations. Yet something remained strained. Not openly hostile. Not dramatic. Simply awkward. Like two people trying to follow a script neither truly understood. Nathaniel noticed it every time. So did Lillian. The child always remained polite. Respectful. Affectionate in a distant sort of way. Yet the ease she displayed around Genevieve never appeared. The difference was impossible to ignore. That afternoon Nathaniel entered the nursery unexpectedly. Voices drifted from the adjoining sitting room. He recognized Lillian immediately. "You promised." The words carried unusual intensity. Nathaniel slowed his steps. "I know I did," Genevieve replied gently. "But it is snowing. You always keep your promises." Silence followed. Nathaniel moved closer. Through the partially open doorway he saw Lillian sitting beside the window wrapped in a blanket. Genevieve knelt beside her. "I also promised to keep you healthy." Lillian frowned. "That is not fair." Genevieve smiled. "It is completely fair." The child sighed dramatically. "Perhaps a little unfair." "A little." "Very little." Lillian crossed her arms. Then suddenly laughed. Genevieve laughed too. The tension vanished immediately. Nathaniel found himself smiling. The exchange felt effortless. Familiar. Comfortable. Like a language they had spoken together for years. Then something happened. Something so small that neither participant appeared aware of it. Lillian leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Genevieve's neck. "You are impossible," she declared. Genevieve hugged her back. "I have been told that before." Lillian rested her head against the woman's shoulder. I love you. Nathaniel's smile faded slightly. Not because the words surprised him. Because of what followed. Genevieve kissed the top of her head. And I love you too. The response came naturally. Instinctively. Without hesitation. Then Lillian whispered something else. Something so quiet Nathaniel almost missed it. You are more of a mama than anyone. The room seemed to stop. Nathaniel felt every muscle in his body go still. Genevieve immediately pulled back. Genuine alarm flashed across her face. Lillian. The child looked confused. What? Do not say things like that. Nathaniel stepped away from the doorway before either could discover him listening. His heart pounded harder than it should have. More of a mama than anyone. The words echoed through his thoughts for the remainder of the day. He tried convincing himself they were merely childish exaggeration. Children often expressed emotions dramatically. Yet deep down he knew better. The statement had not emerged from anger. It had not emerged from rebellion. It had emerged from sincerity. And that made it infinitely more troubling. That evening Nathaniel found himself alone in the library. Firelight flickered across shelves filled with generations of Ravenshire history. Outside, snow drifted steadily from a darkening sky. He poured a glass of brandy and stared into the flames. The door opened quietly. Sebastian Ashcroft entered without ceremony. Pembroke informed me you were brooding. Nathaniel glanced up. Did he? Apparently the entire household is aware of it. Sebastian settled into a chair. You have reached the stage where servants become concerned. Nathaniel almost smiled. That is reassuring. Not particularly. Silence settled between them. Eventually Sebastian leaned forward. Tell me. Nathaniel hesitated. Then recounted everything. The drawings. The letters. The fever. The conversations. The growing emotional distance between mother and daughter. And finally, what he had overheard that afternoon. When he finished, Sebastian remained quiet for a long moment. You know what this means. Nathaniel stared into the fire. Do I? Yes. The Earl's voice carried unusual seriousness. The child has already made her choice. Nathaniel disliked how quickly the word struck home. It should not be a choice. No. Sebastian nodded. It should not. Another silence followed. What would you do? Nathaniel asked. Sebastian considered carefully. I would ask why the choice became necessary. The answer lingered long after his friend departed. Later that night Nathaniel wandered through the estate unable to sleep. Snow reflected moonlight through the windows. The corridors glowed with pale silver light. As he passed the nursery wing, he noticed a faint glow beneath Lillian's bedroom door. Concern immediately surfaced. He knocked softly. No answer. He opened the door. The room was dark except for a small lamp beside the bed. Lillian sat upright beneath her blankets. Awake. Watching the snowfall outside. Lillian? The child looked over. Relief immediately softened her features. Papa. Nathaniel crossed the room and sat beside her. Why are you awake? She hesitated. Could not sleep. Bad dreams? A small nod. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. Would you like to talk about them? Another hesitation. Then she shook her head. For several moments neither spoke. Snow continued drifting beyond the glass. Finally Lillian whispered, Papa? Yes? Do you ever wish things were different? The question caught him completely off guard. Different how? The child looked down at her blanket. Just different. Nathaniel studied her carefully. Something deeper hid beneath the words. He could feel it. Sometimes, he admitted. What would you change? Lillian asked. Nathaniel smiled sadly. I suppose I would spend more time with you. The answer surprised both of them. Lillian looked up. Genuine emotion filled her eyes. Really? Really? The child remained quiet. Then she moved closer and rested her head against his shoulder. Nathaniel wrapped an arm around her. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt peaceful. Comfortable. Then Lillian asked the question that shattered what remained of his certainty. Do you think it is wrong to love two mothers? Nathaniel froze. The room suddenly felt much colder. He looked down slowly. Lillian still stared toward the window. She did not appear rebellious. She did not appear guilty. Only confused. Vulnerable. Honest. Why would you ask that? Nathaniel managed. The child swallowed. Because everyone only gets one. Pain flickered across her face. But I do not feel like I only have one. Nathaniel could not breathe for a moment. He finally understood why the situation hurt so much. Lillian was not choosing between two people. She loved both. One because she was her mother. The other because she had become something emotionally indistinguishable from one. A child should never have been forced into that confusion. Love is not wrong, Nathaniel said quietly. Lillian looked at him. Hope flickered in her eyes. It is not. No. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Never. The child visibly relaxed. Then she asked the question that truly frightened him. Then why does everyone act like it is? Nathaniel had no answer. Because deep down he feared she already knew something he did not. The next morning brought another revelation. Nathaniel entered the breakfast room expecting an ordinary meal. Instead he found Victoria waiting for him. Her expression appeared unusually serious. We need to discuss Genevieve Hartwell. Every instinct inside him sharpened immediately. What about her? Victoria set down her teacup. I believe the situation has gone too far. Nathaniel stared at his wife. A chill moved through him despite the warmth of the room. For months he had searched for answers. Suddenly he suspected one of them was about to walk directly into the light. Nathaniel did not touch his breakfast. The tea cooled untouched beside his plate while he studied his wife across the table. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting pale winter shadows across the room. Victoria remained perfectly composed. Elegant. Controlled. Yet something in her expression felt unusually rigid. What do you mean? Nathaniel finally asked. Victoria folded her napkin carefully. I believe Genevieve has become too involved. The words landed heavily. Nathaniel kept his voice neutral. In what way? In every way. Victoria leaned back slightly. She is a maid, Nathaniel. Not family. The statement immediately brought Lillian's question back to his mind. Do you think it is wrong to love two mothers? He pushed the memory aside. No one is suggesting otherwise. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Are they not? Silence settled between them. Nathaniel watched her carefully. You seem concerned. I am concerned. For the first time genuine emotion appeared beneath her polished exterior. The household talks. Guests notice things. Even neighboring families have begun making observations. Nathaniel thought of Lady Ashcroft. Sebastian. The birthday celebration. The whispers that had followed. Victoria continued. Lillian runs to Genevieve before she runs to me. Her voice softened unexpectedly. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? The word surprised him. Humiliating. Not painful. Not heartbreaking. Humiliating. Nathaniel remained quiet. Victoria looked away toward the window. I am her mother. For the first time he heard something beneath the frustration. Hurt. Real hurt. I know. Then you understand. Nathaniel hesitated. The answer was more complicated than she realized. I understand that something is wrong. Victoria looked back at him immediately. Exactly. He held her gaze. The question is why? The silence that followed felt sharper than before. Victoria's expression hardened. Children become attached to servants. We have discussed this already. Not like this. You are exaggerating. Nathaniel slowly set down his fork. Am I? Victoria looked away first. That alone told him more than he expected. Later that morning, the conversation continued in a much more public setting. Blackthorn House hosted a planning committee for the annual winter charity fundraiser. Several prominent families from the county attended. Ladies gathered in the grand drawing room discussing schedules, donations, decorations, and guest lists. Victoria occupied the center of attention as she often did. Nathaniel rarely involved himself in such matters. Today he remained nearby. Watching. Listening. Observing. Lillian sat quietly near the fireplace with a book. Genevieve remained along the wall assisting servants with refreshments. Everything appeared normal. Then Lady Beaumont arrived. The older woman possessed a reputation for excessive curiosity and insufficient discretion. Within 10 minutes she proved the reputation deserved. Your daughter appears devoted to that maid. The comment emerged during a lull in conversation. Several women immediately pretended not to listen. Nathaniel noticed every one of them listening. Victoria's smile tightened. Children become fond of familiar faces. Lady Beaumont nodded slowly. Of course. Her tone suggested she believed no such thing. Though I have never seen a child cling quite so fiercely. The room grew noticeably quieter. Nathaniel felt tension ripple through the gathering. Victoria's posture stiffened. Lady Lillian is affectionate by nature. Naturally. Another pause. Still, one might almost mistake the arrangement. Nathaniel saw the damage immediately. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody wanted to be rude. Nobody wanted to defend the remark either. The implication hung in the room all the same. Victoria's cheeks flushed faintly. Humiliation. Public. Quiet. Devastating. Nathaniel finally understood what she had meant at breakfast. Before he could intervene, movement near the fireplace drew everyone's attention. Lillian had apparently heard enough to understand she was being discussed. The child slowly closed her book and looked toward the group of women. Genevieve is wonderful. The room fell silent. Victoria immediately looked alarmed. Lillian. The child stood. Innocent. Earnest. Entirely unaware of social strategy. She takes care of everyone. Lady Beaumont smiled awkwardly. I am sure she does, dear. Lillian shook her head. No. You do not understand. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. Something about the child's expression worried him. Lillian, Victoria said more firmly. Sit down. The child obeyed. Yet her eyes remained fixed on the guests. When I am scared, she helps me. Silence. When I am sad, she listens. More silence. When I cannot sleep, she stays. Nathaniel saw several ladies glance toward Genevieve. The maid looked absolutely mortified. Victoria appeared equally uncomfortable. Then Lillian delivered the final blow without intending to. She always comes when she says she will. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nathaniel felt the meaning settle across the room like snowfall. The statement was not an accusation. That made it worse. It was simply truth. Unfiltered through adult caution. Victoria rose abruptly. Excuse us. Her voice remained polite. Barely. She crossed the room toward her daughter. Lillian, come with me. The child blinked. Why? Now. Lillian looked confused but obeyed. Nathaniel watched them disappear into the corridor. The drawing room remained frozen. Finally, Lady Ashcroft spoke. Children have a remarkable gift for honesty. Several people suddenly became fascinated by their teacups. Nathaniel excused himself moments later. He found Victoria and Lillian in a smaller sitting room overlooking the gardens. The atmosphere inside felt tense. Mama? Lillian asked quietly. Did I do something wrong? Victoria stood beside the window with her back turned. No. The answer came too quickly. Then why are you upset? Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Nathaniel saw it. The exhaustion. The frustration. The helplessness. For the first time she looked less like a duchess and more like a mother who had lost control of something important. Because you embarrass me. The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence followed. Immediate. Painful. Lillian stared at her mother. Confusion slowly transformed into hurt. Nathaniel felt something inside him twist. Victoria seemed to realize her mistake instantly. That is not what I meant. But it was too late. Lillian lowered her gaze. I am sorry. The child sounded genuinely devastated. Nathaniel stepped forward immediately. Lillian, go find Genevieve. Both females looked at him. Victoria with shock. Lillian with relief. The child hurried from the room. The moment the door closed, silence descended. Nathaniel turned toward his wife. You should not have said that. Victoria looked close to tears for the first time in years. Then what should I say, she whispered. Tell me. The question carried months. Perhaps years. Of accumulated frustration. Everywhere I go people compare me to her. Nathaniel remained silent. Victoria laughed bitterly. A maid. This is not about status. Of course it is. She looked away. Do you know what they think? Nathaniel suspected he did. They think I failed. The honesty startled him. Victoria pressed a hand against the back of a chair. I have spent years trying to be everything society expects. Her voice shook slightly. The perfect duchess. The perfect hostess. The perfect representative of this family. She swallowed hard. And somehow none of it mattered. Nathaniel watched her carefully. Something important hid beneath the words. Not malice. Not cruelty. Fear. Did you ever ask what Lillian expected? The question landed harder than he intended. Victoria flinched. A knock interrupted them. Before either could respond, the door opened. Mr. Pembroke entered. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. Something about his expression immediately commanded attention. What is it? Nathaniel asked. The butler hesitated. There is a visitor requesting an audience. Who? Pembroke looked unusually unsettled. Mrs. Eleanor Finch. The name meant nothing to Nathaniel. It clearly meant something to Victoria. Color drained from her face. That is impossible, she whispered. Nathaniel frowned. You know her. Victoria said nothing. Mr. Pembroke shifted uncomfortably. She claims to have served as one of Lady Lillian's former nursery attendants. Nathaniel felt every instinct sharpen. A former nursery attendant. Someone from years ago. Someone connected to the period before Genevieve became indispensable. Victoria turned toward the window. Her hands trembled. Very slightly. Yet enough. Nathaniel noticed. And in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that the woman waiting downstairs carried a piece of the truth they had been missing all along. Nathaniel found Mrs. Eleanor Finch waiting in the blue parlor overlooking the south gardens. Snow drifted beyond the windows. The small room remained warm despite the winter weather. A fire crackled softly in the hearth. The woman standing near it appeared to be in her late 50s. Time had silvered her hair and softened her features, but her posture remained remarkably straight. The moment Nathaniel entered, she rose respectfully. Your Grace. Nathaniel studied her carefully. Something about her seemed familiar. Not because he remembered her face. Because she carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years caring for children. Mrs. Finch. He gestured toward a chair. Please sit. She obeyed. Nathaniel remained standing. Victoria had declined to join the meeting. Her refusal alone raised further questions. I understand you once worked at Blackthorn House. Mrs. Finch folded her hands in her lap. For nearly 3 years, Your Grace. As a nursery attendant. Yes. Nathaniel sat opposite her. Why have you come? The older woman hesitated. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the snow-covered gardens. Because I heard people talking in town. Nathaniel frowned. Talking about what? About Lady Lillian. The answer came quietly. And Miss Hartwell. Nathaniel felt his attention sharpen. Continue. Mrs. Finch took a slow breath. There are rumors. Speculation. People asking why a child appears closer to a maid than her mother. Nathaniel remained silent. Most people assume they understand. A sad smile touched her face. They do not. The room grew very still. Then explain it to me. Mrs. Finch looked directly at him. Lady Lillian was lonely long before she understood the meaning of loneliness. The word struck harder than Nathaniel expected. He felt something tighten inside his chest. You are speaking about an infant. Children understand far more than adults realize. Nathaniel thought of every drawing. Every letter. Every moment he had witnessed over the previous months. Slowly, he nodded. Tell me everything. Mrs. Finch lowered her gaze briefly, organizing memories that clearly remained vivid despite the passing years. When Lady Lillian was born, everyone expected a happy family. A faint smile appeared. You adored her immediately. Nathaniel felt surprise. You remember that? Everyone remembers that. Her smile deepened slightly. You carried her through the halls when she could not sleep. You cancelled meetings to spend time in the nursery. Half the household believed you would spoil her completely. Despite everything, Nathaniel found himself smiling. Then the smile faded. Because he knew what came next. Business responsibilities. Travel. Obligations. Life. And Victoria, he asked. Mrs. Finch hesitated. Her Grace loved Lady Lillian. Nathaniel noticed the wording immediately. Loved. Past tense. Or perhaps simply careful wording. But? Mrs. Finch sighed. Her Grace struggled. Nathaniel frowned. With motherhood. With expectations. The answer surprised him. Explain. The older woman folded her hands together more tightly. Everyone expected perfection from her. Society. Family. Friends. Charitable organizations. Committees. Newspapers. She looked toward the fire. Everywhere she went, people watched. Nathaniel understood that much. The wife of a duke occupied a difficult position. Every appearance carried scrutiny. Every mistake attracted attention. Many women face those pressures. Yes. Mrs. Finch nodded. But not all women react the same way. Silence settled between them. Victoria focused on being the perfect duchess, Nathaniel said quietly. Mrs. Finch met his gaze. And gradually forgot how to simply be a mother. The truth landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Yet impossible to ignore. Nathaniel remained silent. Mrs. Finch continued. At first the differences seemed small. Her voice softened. Missed afternoons. Cancelled outings. Promises delayed until tomorrow. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. The letters. The notes. The same pattern repeated. Lady Lillian always waited. Mrs. Finch smiled sadly. Children are patient. Much more patient than adults. Nathaniel felt guilt stirring inside him. Not only for Victoria. For himself. He had been absent too often as well. Yet somehow Lillian had never looked at him the same way. Why? The answer came moments later. Whenever you returned from London, you made time for her. Mrs. Finch seemed to read his thoughts. Even if only for an hour. Nathaniel looked up. Victoria did not. Mrs. Finch hesitated. Her Grace always intended to. The words felt painfully familiar. Intended to. Nathaniel had spent years surrounded by good intentions. They did not erase consequences. When did Genevieve enter the picture, he asked. A different expression crossed Mrs. Finch's face. Warmth. Respect. Perhaps even admiration. At exactly the right moment. Nathaniel leaned forward. What does that mean? The older woman smiled faintly. Lady Lillian was nearly 1 year old. Her fever frightened everyone. Nathaniel knew that story already. Or at least he thought he did. Mrs. Abbott told me what happened. Then she only told part of it. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. Part of it. Mrs. Finch nodded slowly. The fever itself was not the important thing. A strange sensation moved through him. The room suddenly felt smaller. Quieter. Then what was? Mrs. Finch stared into the flames for several seconds before answering. The night after the fever broke. Nathaniel waited. Lady Lillian woke crying. Her voice dropped. Not because she was ill. Because she thought someone had left her. The Duke frowned. Someone. Mrs. Finch nodded. Her mother. Silence crashed through the room. Nathaniel felt his heart begin pounding. Explain. The older woman swallowed. Her Grace had promised to stay with her. Nathaniel stared. And? A carriage arrived from London. Mrs. Finch looked down. There was a charity function. Important guests. Important people. Nathaniel already knew where the story was heading. He did not want to hear it anyway. Victoria left. Mrs. Finch nodded. Lady Lillian was too young to understand schedules. Responsibilities. Society. Her eyes grew sad. She only understood that someone promised to stay. Nathaniel felt sick. Not because the action itself sounded unforgivable. Because he suddenly understood how many similar moments might have followed. What happened then? He asked quietly. Mrs. Finch smiled softly. Genevieve happened. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Of course. The child cried for hours. And Genevieve comforted her. No. Mrs. Finch shook her head. Not immediately. Nathaniel opened his eyes again. What do you mean? Genevieve sat beside the crib and talked to her. The older woman laughed gently at the memory. She explained where her Grace had gone. She explained that people sometimes leave and still come back. Nathaniel listened carefully. Every word mattered now. Eventually Lady Lillian fell asleep holding Genevieve's finger. Silence followed. Then Mrs. Finch added the detail that changed everything. The next morning, she would not let go. Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs. She was a baby. Exactly. Mrs. Finch nodded. A baby who decided which adult always remained when promises disappeared. The word settled heavily between them. Nathaniel finally understood why every explanation so far had felt incomplete. This was not merely affection. It was trust. Deep, foundational trust formed before memory itself. Trust built through repetition. Presence. Reliability. The things children notice most. Mrs. Finch rose slowly from her chair. There is one more thing. Nathaniel looked up. The older woman hesitated. Then she spoke very carefully. Lady Lillian stopped waiting for certain promises years ago. A chill moved through him. What promises? Mrs. Finch looked genuinely heartbroken. The ones made by her mother. The room fell silent. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. Nathaniel stared at the fire without truly seeing it. Every drawing. Every letter. Every conversation. Every moment suddenly aligned into a pattern too clear to ignore. Yet even now something remained missing. One final piece. One final truth hidden somewhere beneath the years. As Mrs. Finch reached the doorway, Nathaniel spoke again. Why did you really come here? The older woman paused. Slowly, she turned back. Emotion shimmered briefly in her eyes. Because Lady Lillian deserves better than becoming a scandal. Nathaniel frowned. Mrs. Finch's expression softened. And because there is something she has never told anyone. The Duke went completely still. What? Mrs. Finch looked toward the corridor leading deeper into the house. Toward the nursery wing. Toward his daughter. She remembers more than everyone thinks she does. Then she left. And for the first time since this mystery began, Nathaniel felt genuine fear. Not for what he had already learned. For what Lillian herself might still be carrying. Nathaniel did not sleep that night. Long after the estate had fallen silent, he remained seated in his study staring into the dying fire. Mrs. Finch's final words echoed relentlessly through his thoughts. She remembers more than everyone thinks she does. At first the statement seemed impossible. Lillian had been so young when many of these events occurred. Yet the more he reflected on everything he had learned, the less impossible it felt. Children remembered emotions long before they remembered details. They remembered who stayed. Who left? Who listened? Who came when called? The next morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky. Snow still covered the estate grounds. The household moved through its routines as though nothing had changed. Nathaniel knew better. Something had changed. The final barrier between questions and answers was beginning to crack. He found Lillian in the conservatory shortly after breakfast. The glass-walled room overlooked the eastern gardens. Winter sunlight filtered through the panes, casting golden patterns across the stone floor. Exotic plants thrived in the warmth despite the season outside. Lillian sat beside a small table sketching in a notebook. For a few moments Nathaniel simply watched her. She looked peaceful. Innocent. Yet somehow older than her years. As though she had spent a long time carrying thoughts she did not know how to share. "May I join you?" he asked. Lillian looked up and smiled. "Of course, Papa." Nathaniel took the seat opposite her. Silence settled comfortably between them. The child returned to her drawing. He noticed she was sketching a robin perched on a snow-covered branch. "That is very good." Lillian smiled shyly. "Genevieve taught me how to draw feathers." Of course she had. Nathaniel felt a familiar ache. Nearly every road seemed to lead back to the same person. Not because Genevieve demanded attention. Because she had quietly been present during so many moments that mattered. Nathaniel folded his hands together. "Lillian." The child looked up immediately. "Yes?" He hesitated. The conversation suddenly felt more difficult than expected. "Do you remember Mrs. Finch?" Surprise crossed her face. "The nursery lady." Nathaniel nodded. "She visited yesterday." Lillian looked thoughtful. "I liked her." "She liked you as well." The child smiled. Then returned to her sketch. Nathaniel studied her carefully. "She told me something interesting." Lillian paused. "What?" She said children remember more than adults realize. The pencil stopped moving. Very slowly. Nathaniel noticed. Every instinct sharpened. "Do they?" Lillian asked quietly. "I think they do." Silence stretched between them. The robin remained unfinished. "Lillian." Nathaniel kept his voice gentle. "Is there something you remember that you have never told me?" The question lingered in the warm air of the conservatory. For several moments the child said nothing. Nathaniel feared he had pushed too hard. Then she surprised him. "Maybe." His heart began to pound. "Maybe." Lillian lowered her eyes. "I do not know if it counts." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." The child traced the edge of her notebook with one finger. "Sometimes I remember feelings." Nathaniel remained silent. Encouraging. Waiting. Not whole memories. She struggled for the right words. "Just pieces." He nodded. "That is all right." Lillian swallowed. "Like being afraid." The words instantly commanded his full attention. "Afraid of what?" The child frowned slightly. "I do not know." Her voice grew softer. "Just afraid." Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. Can you tell me more? Lillian stared toward the snowy gardens beyond the glass. There was a room. A strange chill moved through him. A room? I think so. She sounded uncertain. Maybe. Nathaniel remained very still. What kind of room? Lillian closed her eyes briefly. Dark. The answer barely rose above a whisper. I remember waiting. Nathaniel felt his pulse quicken. Waiting for whom? The child opened her eyes again. Emotion shimmered there. Confusion. Sadness. Longing. Mama. Silence crashed through him. He forced himself to remain calm. Tell me what happened. Lillian looked down at her hands. I do not know exactly. She sounded frustrated. I only remember waiting. Nathaniel watched her carefully. Every word mattered now. And? She did not come. The sentence emerged so quietly that he almost missed it. Yet the impact struck like thunder. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Not because the statement shocked him. Because of how much pain remained inside such a small memory. A child waiting. A mother absent. What happened then? He asked softly. Lillian's answer came immediately. Genevieve came. Nathaniel looked away toward the snowy gardens. For several moments he could not trust himself to speak. The pattern was complete. Not one event. Not one mistake. 1,000 small moments layered together across years. A child waiting. A promise delayed. A disappointment softened by someone else. Eventually trust shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Until one day everyone noticed the result but nobody understood the journey. Papa. Lillian's voice pulled him back. He looked at her. Yes? The child hesitated. Are you angry? Nathaniel felt his heart break a little. At whom? Me. The answer stunned him. Never. Lillian visibly relaxed. Yet tears shimmered faintly in her eyes. I tried. Nathaniel frowned. Tried what? The child looked down. To be happy when Mama was busy. The confession shattered what remained of his composure. Not outwardly. Years of discipline prevented that. Inside, however, something cracked. An 8-year-old should never have felt responsible for managing a parent's absence. Lillian. His voice sounded rougher than intended. You never needed to do that. The child blinked. I did not. No. Nathaniel reached across the table and gently took her hand. You were a child. Tears finally slipped free. I did not want her to feel bad. For a moment he could not breathe. Because suddenly he understood something terrible. Lillian had spent years protecting everyone else's feelings. Victoria's. Genevieve's. Even his. While carrying her own disappointments alone. Nathaniel rose and moved beside her chair. The child immediately leaned into him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally Lillian whispered the question she had apparently carried for years. Was I difficult to love? Nathaniel felt the world stop. Completely. Utterly. He pulled back enough to look directly into her eyes. No. His answer came instantly. Fiercely. Never. Fresh tears appeared. Then why? She could not finish. She did not need to. Nathaniel understood. Why was Mama always busy? Why was there always something more important? Why did promises disappear? Why did another woman become the person she trusted most? The questions had haunted her far longer than anyone realized. Listen to me. Nathaniel waited until she met his gaze. You were never difficult to love. The child stared at him. Not for 1 second. Her lips trembled. Promise? Nathaniel felt emotion rising dangerously close to the surface. I promise. Lillian nodded slowly. Then she buried her face against his shoulder. Nathaniel held her tightly. Outside, snow drifted across the gardens. Inside, years of unspoken hurt finally began finding words. Much later, after Lillian returned to her lessons, Nathaniel remained alone in the conservatory. His thoughts churned relentlessly. He finally understood the truth. The mystery had never been about Genevieve. Not really. Genevieve had not stolen a child's affection. She had earned a child's trust. There was a profound difference between the two. The door opened quietly behind him. Nathaniel turned. Victoria stood in the entrance. She studied his expression for only a moment before concern appeared. What happened? Nathaniel looked at his wife. For the first time since this journey began, he realized he no longer wanted assumptions. He wanted honesty. Complete honesty. Lillian told me something today. Victoria went pale almost immediately. The reaction confirmed more than words ever could. Nathaniel held her gaze. I think it is time we stop pretending nothing is wrong. And as silence settled between them, he knew the conversation they had both avoided for years could no longer be postponed. Victoria did not answer immediately. The conservatory suddenly felt smaller than before. Winter sunlight streamed through the glass walls. Snow covered the gardens outside. Yet neither of them seemed aware of anything beyond the conversation waiting between them. Nathaniel stood motionless beside the table where Lillian had been drawing moments earlier. Victoria remained near the doorway. For several long seconds, silence stretched between them. Then she spoke. What did she tell you? Nathaniel watched her carefully. She asked whether she was difficult to love. The color drained from Victoria's face. Completely. Her breath caught. Nathaniel saw genuine pain flash across her features. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Pain. No. The word escaped her immediately. No, she would never. Her voice broke. She looked away. Nathaniel felt no satisfaction. No triumph. Only sadness. She believes your absence was her fault. Victoria closed her eyes. Stop. I cannot. Nathaniel's voice remained calm. Not anymore. The Duchess pressed a hand against the edge of a chair. Suddenly she looked exhausted. Older. Vulnerable in a way he had not seen for years. You think I do not know, she whispered. Nathaniel stared at her. Victoria laughed softly. Bitterly. You think I have not seen it? Tears shimmered in her eyes. Every time she runs to Genevieve. Every time she lights up when that girl enters a room. Nathaniel remained silent. Victoria looked toward the snowy gardens. Do you have any idea what it feels like? Her voice trembled. To realize your own child trusts someone else more than you. For the first time since this began, Nathaniel saw beneath the polished exterior. Beneath the Duchess. Beneath the social perfection. He saw a woman carrying years of regret. Then why did you let it happen? He asked quietly. Victoria flinched. The question struck its target. Because I kept believing there would be time. The answer came in a whisper. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. Victoria laughed again. There was no humor in it. One more meeting. One more charity event. One more obligation. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I always thought I would make it up to her later. The room fell silent. Nathaniel understood that logic. Too well. He had used similar reasoning himself. The difference was that he had eventually returned. Victoria had never truly stopped running. She waited for you. Victoria lowered her head. I know. For years. I know. Nathaniel looked away briefly. And eventually she stopped. Victoria closed her eyes. Fresh tears appeared. She did not deny it. She could not. Because somewhere inside, she already knew it was true. 3 days later, Blackthorn House hosted the annual Winter Charity Gala. The event had been scheduled for months. Cancellation would create scandal. Attendance was unavoidable. By evening, carriages lined the circular drive outside the estate. Lanterns illuminated the snow-covered grounds. Guests arrived wrapped in elegant winter cloaks. Music drifted through the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished marble floors. The gathering represented everything Victorian society admired. Wealth, influence, refinement, status. Nathaniel usually navigated such occasions effortlessly. Tonight he felt unusually detached. Too much had changed. Too many truths had surfaced. Yet the evening progressed as expected. Ladies discussed charitable projects. Gentlemen debated politics and business. Victoria performed her duties with practiced grace. Nobody looking at her would have guessed she had spent the previous 2 nights crying behind closed doors. Nathaniel knew because he had heard it himself. Around 9 o'clock, the event took an unexpected turn. A group of prominent guests gathered near the ballroom staircase. Among them stood Lady Beaumont. Predictably, Nathaniel noticed immediately when the conversation shifted toward his family. "I heard the child still refuses to leave that maid's side." The remark came lightly, casually. The kind of cruelty society often disguised as curiosity. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lady Ashcroft immediately frowned. "That is hardly anyone's business." Lady Beaumont smiled politely. "Of course not. I merely find the situation unusual." Nathaniel felt irritation rising. He started toward the group. Before he could reach them, another voice joined the conversation. Unusual, perhaps. Understandable, certainly. The room seemed to pause. The speaker was Mrs. Eleanor Finch. Nathaniel had invited her personally. Few people recognized her. Those who did looked surprised. Lady Beaumont blinked. "And you are?" Mrs. Finch smiled calmly. "Someone who knew Lady Lillian when she was very small." Silence followed. Several nearby guests immediately became interested. Society adored secrets. Mrs. Finch continued. "Children do not choose favorites because of titles." The room grew quieter. "They choose people who make them feel safe." Nathaniel watched carefully. Across the ballroom, Victoria had also heard. He saw her freeze. Completely still. "Surely that is an oversimplification," Lady Beaumont replied. Mrs. Finch shook her head. "No." Her voice remained gentle. "It is actually quite simple." More guests drifted closer. Drawn by curiosity. Drawn by tension. Nathaniel understood exactly what was happening. For months whispers had spread through society. Tonight the whispers were finally meeting truth. The child was not rejecting anyone, Mrs. Finch continued. She was holding on to the person who consistently remained beside her. Silence settled heavily across the gathering. Nobody laughed. Nobody objected. Because everyone understood the meaning beneath the words. Victoria stood motionless. Nathaniel could see emotion building behind her composed expression. Then something extraordinary happened. Lillian entered the ballroom. She had spent most of the evening upstairs with Genevieve. Nathaniel immediately noticed that she looked nervous. The child crossed the room slowly. Unaware of the conversation she was interrupting. Or perhaps aware of it. It was difficult to tell. Several guests stepped aside. The crowd naturally parted. Suddenly everyone was watching. Lillian stopped beside her father. Her small hand slipped into his. Nathaniel squeezed it gently. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. Then her gaze moved across the room. Toward Victoria. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Victoria stared at her daughter. Lillian stared back. For a moment neither moved. Then something broke inside the Duchess. Years of pride. Regret. Fear. All of it. She crossed the ballroom. Not with the graceful control expected of a duchess. Not with careful dignity. Simply as a mother. When she reached Lillian, her voice shook. "I am sorry." The room fell completely silent. Nathaniel felt his heart stop. Victoria knelt despite the hundreds of watching eyes. "I am so sorry." Tears streamed freely down her face now. No attempt remained to hide them. "I miss too much." Lillian stared at her in shock. Victoria swallowed hard. "You were never difficult to love." Her voice cracked. Not for 1 second. The ballroom disappeared. The guests disappeared. Only mother and daughter remained. "I thought there would always be more time." Victoria reached for her child's hand. Carefully. Hesitantly. As though afraid permission might be denied. "I was wrong." Tears filled Lillian's eyes. Nathaniel watched the entire room soften. Even Lady Beaumont looked ashamed. "Mama." Lillian whispered. Victoria nodded. "I know I cannot change the past." More tears slipped down her cheeks. "But I would like to do better if you will let me." Silence followed. Long, fragile. Then Lillian stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. A collective breath seemed to release across the ballroom. Victoria held her tightly. Like someone afraid to let go. Nathaniel felt unexpected emotion rise inside him. Not because everything had been fixed. It had not. Years could not be repaired in a single conversation. Yet something important had happened. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. Publicly. Honestly. Without excuses. As mother and daughter embraced, Nathaniel noticed movement near the doorway. Genevieve stood there. Quiet as always. Trying not to attract attention. Trying not to interrupt. Yet her eyes shone with tears. She looked relieved. Truly relieved. The sight struck him deeply. Because at that moment he understood something essential. Genevieve had never wanted to replace Victoria. She had spent years protecting a child while quietly hoping a mother and daughter might eventually find their way back to each other. And suddenly Nathaniel realized that among everyone in the room, she had perhaps sacrificed the most. Without asking for recognition. Without asking for reward. Without asking for anything at all. As applause slowly began to ripple through the ballroom, Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed on her. And for the first time, he knew exactly what he needed to do next. The applause faded slowly, replaced by the gentle hum of conversation spreading throughout the ballroom. Guests returned to their discussions. Music resumed. Servants moved gracefully through the crowd carrying trays of refreshments. Yet something had shifted inside Blackthorn House. The atmosphere felt lighter. Warmer. As though a burden carried for years had finally been set down. Nathaniel remained near the staircase watching Lillian and Victoria together. The reunion had not magically erased the past. He knew that. Victoria knew it as well. Trust rebuilt itself slowly. Through actions rather than words. Through consistency rather than promises. Yet for the first time in years, mother and daughter were at least facing each other honestly. That mattered. Across the ballroom, Genevieve quietly attempted to disappear. Nathaniel almost smiled. Even after everything that had happened, she still seemed determined to avoid attention. The woman had spent years carrying responsibilities that should never have belonged to her. Yet the moment recognition threatened to arrive, her instinct remained the same. Step back. Remain silent. Allow others to take center stage. Nathaniel watched as she turned toward a side corridor. Clearly intending to escape before anyone noticed her. Not this time. He crossed the ballroom. Several guests greeted him along the way. He barely heard them. His focus remained fixed on Genevieve. She reached the corridor moments before he did. "Miss Hartwell." The sound of his voice stopped her immediately. She turned. Surprise flickered across her face. "Your Grace." Nathaniel noticed the uncertainty in her expression. The caution. Almost as though she expected criticism. The realization troubled him. After everything she had done, why would she expect anything else? "Would you walk with me?" he asked. Genevieve blinked. "Now. If you do not mind." For a brief moment she appeared uncertain how to answer. Then she nodded. Of course. They left the ballroom together and entered the quieter halls of the estate. Music faded behind them. The noise of the gala gradually disappeared. Snow drifted beyond the tall windows lining the corridor. Candlelight flickered softly against the walls. Neither spoke immediately. Nathaniel found himself reflecting on how often he had walked these halls over the years. How many times Genevieve had likely passed him unnoticed. How many acts of kindness had occurred beyond his awareness. "You are uncomfortable," he observed. Genevieve looked startled. "Your Grace? You are waiting for me to say something difficult." Color touched her cheeks. "I apologize." "Do not." Nathaniel slowed his pace. "You have spent years apologizing for things that were never your fault." She looked away. The response alone confirmed how accurate the observation was. They reached the conservatory. Empty now. Quiet. Winter moonlight mixed with candlelight, creating soft reflections across the glass walls. Nathaniel opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Genevieve obeyed. The room felt peaceful compared to the crowded ballroom. For several moments neither spoke. Then Nathaniel turned toward her. "Thank you." The words seemed to catch her completely off guard. "Your Grace?" "Thank you." He repeated them deliberately. "For every fever. Every nightmare. Every story. Every promise you kept." Emotion immediately appeared in her eyes. "You do not need to thank me." "Yes." Nathaniel held her gaze. "I do." Genevieve lowered her eyes. The familiar gesture no longer seemed like modesty. It seemed like someone who genuinely believed recognition belonged elsewhere. "I only did what anyone would have done." Nathaniel almost laughed. "No." His voice softened. "You did far more." Silence settled between them. Genevieve looked toward the snowy gardens beyond the glass. Lady Lillian is easy to love. The simple honesty of the statement touched him deeply. No hesitation. No calculation. Just truth. "She loves you very much." Genevieve smiled faintly. "I know." Nathaniel noticed something unusual in her expression. Relief. Not possessiveness. Not triumph. Relief. "You are happy about what happened tonight?" Genevieve immediately nodded. "Very." Nathaniel studied her. "Even though it means she may need you less." For the first time she looked directly at him. That was always the goal. The answer struck him with unexpected force. Because it revealed the one thing he had finally stopped questioning. Genevieve had never been competing with Victoria. Not once. She had simply been protecting a child until a mother found her way back. The realization deepened his admiration. And something else. Something increasingly difficult to ignore. "You never wanted recognition." Genevieve smiled softly. "No." "You never wanted credit." "No." "You never wanted gratitude." She hesitated. Seeing her happy was enough. Nathaniel felt emotion tighten in his chest. For years he had surrounded himself with people seeking advantage. Influence. Position. Approval. Yet the person who had given the most had asked for the least. The contrast felt impossible to ignore. Before either could continue, hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. The conservatory door burst open. Lillian appeared. Slightly breathless. Followed by Victoria. The child immediately spotted Genevieve. Relief flooded her face. "There you are." Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Genevieve. The maid smiled. "I was not gone very long." "I know." Lillian hesitated. Then looked unexpectedly nervous. Victoria noticed as well. "What is it?" The child shifted her weight. "Can I ask something?" Nathaniel knelt slightly so they stood at eye level. "Anything." Lillian looked from one adult to another. Her gaze settled on Genevieve. "Will things be different now?" Silence followed. The question clearly carried more meaning than the words themselves. Genevieve understood immediately. So did Victoria. So did Nathaniel. The child feared losing someone. Again. Victoria stepped forward first. Some things will be different. Her voice sounded gentle. Honest. I hope I will spend much more time with you. Lillian nodded slowly. Then she looked at Genevieve. Anxiety remained in her eyes. But she is staying, right? The question shattered what little composure remained in the room. Nathaniel saw Victoria close her eyes briefly. Saw Genevieve swallow hard. Saw the child brace herself for disappointment before any answer arrived. Years of experience had taught her to expect loss. That realization hurt more than he could describe. Lillian. Nathaniel waited until she looked at him. Genevieve is not leaving. Relief appeared instantly. Powerful. Visible. Genuine. The child exhaled so deeply it almost broke his heart. Really? Really? Nathaniel stood. Then he made a decision. One he had already reached hours earlier. He simply had not spoken it aloud. Until now. In fact, I have something I would like to announce. 3 pairs of eyes focused on him. Nathaniel looked directly at Genevieve. For years, Miss Hartwell has served this family with loyalty, compassion, and extraordinary devotion. Genevieve immediately looked uncomfortable. Your Grace. He continued anyway. Far beyond the responsibilities of her position. Victoria stepped forward. Understanding appeared in her expression. She nodded. Once. Encouraging him. Nathaniel turned toward both women. Beginning today, Miss Hartwell will no longer be considered merely a member of the household staff. Genevieve stared at him in shock. Your Grace, that is not necessary. It is. Nathaniel's voice remained firm. For too long your contributions have gone unrecognized. He paused. You will serve as Lady Lillian's official companion and governess. With all the respect and authority that position deserves. Complete silence followed. Genevieve looked utterly stunned. Victoria smiled through tears. It is long overdue. Lillian's face lit up. Does that mean she stays? Nathaniel laughed softly. Yes. The child immediately threw her arms around Genevieve. The woman barely managed to catch her balance. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks. Genuine tears. The kind that arrived when gratitude overwhelmed restraint. Thank you, she whispered. Nathaniel looked at her. Truly looked at her. And for the first time he noticed something he should have recognized long ago. The strength beneath her kindness. The courage beneath her gentleness. The quiet dignity she carried every day. Not because anyone rewarded it. Because it was simply who she was. As Lillian continued hugging her, Victoria moved closer. Hesitantly. Then she surprised everyone. Including herself. Thank you for loving my daughter when I failed to show her enough. Genevieve immediately shook her head. You never failed to love her. Victoria's eyes filled again. Perhaps not. Her voice trembled. But I failed to show it. No one argued. Because no one needed to. The truth had already done its work. Outside, snow continued falling softly across the estate. Inside, something else settled over the conservatory. Peace. Not perfect. Not complete. But real. And as Nathaniel watched the 3 people standing together beneath the winter moonlight, he realized that the final chapter of this story would not be about loss at all. It would be about choosing what mattered most and having the courage to hold on to it. Spring arrived gradually at Blackthorn Estate. Snow disappeared from the gardens. New blossoms emerged along the winding pathways. Sunlight lingered longer each evening. The world seemed determined to begin again. Inside the estate, something similar had happened. Not suddenly. Not perfectly. But steadily. Day after day. Week after week. Trust rebuilt itself through ordinary moments. Victoria kept her promises. When she said she would attend a lesson, she attended. When she promised afternoon tea, she arrived. When she planned an outing with Lillian, nothing displaced it from her schedule. At first the child remained cautious. Nathaniel understood why. Hope returned more slowly than disappointment. Yet little by little, something changed. The distance between mother and daughter began to shrink. Not because anyone demanded it. Because both finally chose it. One warm afternoon in May, Nathaniel paused outside the rose garden and witnessed a scene that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. Victoria sat beneath a flowering arbor helping Lillian paint watercolor sketches of the gardens. Their heads bent together over the same sheet of paper. Laughter drifted through the air. Real laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind that required no effort. No performance. Nathaniel remained where he was, unwilling to interrupt. Beside him stood Genevieve. She carried several books intended for Lillian's afternoon lessons. Neither spoke immediately. They simply watched. Eventually Genevieve smiled. She looks happy. Nathaniel glanced toward her. She does. The answer carried more meaning than the words themselves. Genevieve understood. Her smile softened. Her grace has worked very hard. Nathaniel nodded. She has. Victoria deserved credit. Not because she had become perfect. Because she had finally become present. There was a difference. The Duchess no longer measured motherhood through appearances or expectations. She measured it through time. Through attention. Through showing up. The transformation had not been easy. Nathaniel had witnessed the effort firsthand. He respected her deeply for it. Across the garden, Lillian suddenly looked up and spotted them. Her face immediately brightened. Papa. She waved enthusiastically. Then turned toward Genevieve. And Genevieve. Nathaniel smiled. Some things had not changed. Nor should they. Lillian still reached for Genevieve instinctively. She still sought her advice. Her comfort. Her companionship. The difference was that she no longer feared losing her. The fear that had shadowed so much of her childhood had finally begun to fade. Come see this, Lillian called. Nathaniel and Genevieve crossed the garden together. Victoria looked up as they approached. A smile touched her lips. Months earlier such a moment would have carried awkwardness. Tension. Now it felt natural. Lillian proudly held up her painting. The colors were imperfect. The proportions uneven. It did not matter. It is beautiful, Nathaniel said. You always say that. The child narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Because it is always true. Lillian laughed. Victoria rolled her eyes playfully. Genevieve shook her head. The scene felt ordinary. Nathaniel realized it was exactly what made it extraordinary. For years the family had existed beneath the same roof while moving along separate paths. Now those paths finally intersected. Summer arrived. Then autumn. Life continued. Blackthorn House hosted guests. Charitable events. Family gatherings. Seasons changed. Yet the foundation beneath everything remained stronger than before. One evening, nearly a year after the birthday celebration that had started it all, Nathaniel found himself alone in his study. A familiar wooden box rested upon his desk. The same box that had contained Lillian's letters. He opened it slowly. The old notes remained inside. Drawings. Messages. Tiny pieces of childhood preserved across the years. Nathaniel read several again. This time the words felt different. Not because the past had changed. Because the future had. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Enter. Lillian stepped inside. She was no longer the frightened child who had once wondered whether she was difficult to love. Confidence had begun replacing uncertainty. Lightness had replaced fear. What are you reading? She asked. Nathaniel smiled. Old memories. The child approached. Her eyes widened when she recognized the contents of the box. Oh no. Nathaniel laughed. Oh yes. Lillian groaned dramatically and covered her face. Those are embarrassing. They are precious. She peeked between her fingers. That sounds like something old people say. Nathaniel pretended to be offended. I am not old. You are a duke. That is not the same thing. Lillian laughed and settled into the chair beside his desk. Comfortable. Secure. Happy. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. May I ask you something? Of course. He hesitated. Then asked the question he had carried for months. Do you still feel as though you have two mothers? Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Lillian considered the question carefully. Finally she smiled. No. Nathaniel blinked. The answer surprised him. No. The child shook her head. I feel like I have one mother. Nathaniel listened carefully. And Genevieve. Lillian's smile deepened. Genevieve is Genevieve. The simplicity of the answer caught him off guard. Meaning. Lillian looked toward the window where evening sunlight painted the gardens gold. She is family. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Nathaniel's chest. Family. Not replacement. Not substitute. Not rival. Family. The word somehow explained everything. A few minutes later, they walked together toward the drawing room. Voices drifted through the corridor. Warm voices. Familiar voices. Victoria sat near the fireplace reading. Genevieve organized lesson materials nearby. Both looked up as Nathaniel and Lillian entered. The child immediately crossed the room and settled beside her mother. Victoria instinctively wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The gesture appeared natural now. Practiced. Earned. Genevieve smiled quietly from across the room. Nathaniel paused near the doorway. For a moment he simply watched. The scene before him looked remarkably simple. A mother. A daughter. A woman who had helped hold a family together when it needed her most. Yet Nathaniel knew how much history lived beneath that simplicity. How many missed chances? How many second chances? How much forgiveness? How much love? Victoria noticed him watching. What is it? Nathaniel smiled. Nothing. But it was not nothing. It was everything. He finally understood what had taken him so long to see. Lillian had never chosen one woman over another. She had simply reached for the person who made her feel safe when she needed safety most. Children did not care about titles, status, appearances. They cared about presence, about trust, about who stayed when the world felt uncertain. Genevieve had been that person. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted reward. Because she loved a child who needed someone to stay. And in doing so, she had quietly taught an entire family what love actually looked like. Nathaniel crossed the room and joined them. Outside, evening settled gently across Blackthorn Estate. Inside, firelight filled the drawing room with warmth. Lillian laughed at something Victoria said. Genevieve smiled. Nathaniel looked around at the people he loved and felt a profound sense of peace. Some stories ended with grand gestures. Others ended with truth. This one ended with both. A mother who learned that love must be shown, not merely felt. A child who learned she had always been worthy of love. A woman whose kindness changed lives without ever asking for recognition. And a father who finally understood why his daughter had made the choice that once seemed impossible to explain. In the end, the answer had never been complicated. She had simply chosen the person who was there. And because the people she loved finally understood that truth, none of them would ever have to face it alone again.